I'll never forget the day my nephew Leonardo humiliated me in front of the entire family. It was at my mother's birthday party, a celebration I had helped organize, spent hours in the kitchen preparing the snacks everyone loved, decorated every corner of the house with balloons and flowers, all with my own money because I wanted that day to be special for her. I was there, sweaty, tired, but happy to see everyone together, when Leonardo arrived with that air of superiority he'd always had since he started making money. He was 28 years old, drove an imported car, wore designer clothes, and loved rubbing everyone's face in how successful he was. I, on the other hand, was the spinster aunt at 42, a public school teacher who lived in a rented 2-bedroom apartment and drove a popular car over 10 years old. To Leonardo, I was a joke, and he never missed an opportunity to make me feel small. That day, I was serving guests when I heard his voice echoing through the room. Leonardo was surrounded by younger cousins, all looking at him with admiration while he talked about his latest trip to Dubai. Then, out of nowhere, he pointed at me and said loudly, so everyone could hear, "Look at Aunt Marcia over there, poor thing, spent all day making coccinha. Marcia, when are you going to find a husband and stop living this cleaning lady life? Oh, I forgot that teachers make a pittance, right? It probably doesn't even pay for a decent hairdresser." The laughter erupted around him. Some cousins laughed openly, others disguised it with embarrassed coughs, but the damage was done. I felt my face burn, my hands trembled, and the tray I was holding almost fell to the floor. My mother was on the other side of the room and didn't hear. My older brother, Leonardo's father, was outside smoking. Nobody came to my defense. I swallowed my tears, forced a weak smile, and went back to the kitchen, where I finally let the tears flow in silence. After that day, I made a decision. I was going to distance myself from that toxic family, at least from the part that included Leonardo and my brother Rogerio, who raised that spoiled brat without any sense of respect or humility. I continued visiting my mother, but at family parties I made excuses. I had tests to grade, I had a migraine, I had plans with friends. Anything to avoid having to swallow more humiliation. Months passed, and I was honestly at peace with that decision. My life was simple, but it was mine. I had my students who adored me, my longtime friends, my books, my shows, my cat named Fitzgerald. I didn't need Leonardo's approval or anyone else's in that family who never valued me. It was then that 6 months after that terrible party, my phone rang on a Tuesday night. It was my brother Rogerio, and from his voice, I immediately knew something was wrong. Rogerio never called me. He was one of those brothers who only remembered I existed when he needed something, and even then, he usually sent a message. A call meant urgency, and urgency in our family usually meant trouble. My heart sank, thinking it might be something with my mother. But when he started talking, I realized the problem was different. Leonardo was in trouble, big trouble, the kind that could completely destroy his life. My nephew, the same one who had humiliated me in front of everyone, who laughed at my profession and my simple life, was facing a criminal case that could send him to prison. The story Rogerio told me was long and complicated, but in summary, Leonardo worked as a sales manager at a large technology company, one of those startups that grow fast and promise the world to everyone. He earned well, very well, with fat commissions and absurd bonuses. It was exactly this money that had gone to his head and transformed the boy I knew into an arrogant and unbearable adult. It turns out the company was being investigated for tax fraud and money laundering, and Leonardo, as a manager, had signed a series of documents that were now being used as evidence against him. My brother swore up and down that Leonardo was innocent, that he had been deceived by his superiors, that he was just a pawn in the scheme. But the truth was that Leonardo's name was tarnished. He had been fired, was being criminally prosecuted, and faced the real possibility of spending years behind bars. The desperation in my brother's voice was palpable. He had spent all his savings hiring expensive lawyers who weren't managing to solve anything. The situation was too technical, too complex, and involved tax and financial issues that were beyond the family's understanding. That's when Rogerio mentioned, almost in passing, that he had heard that cases like this needed specialized accounting expertise, and he remembered that I had done a master's degree in public administration with an emphasis on auditing and expenditure control. I was silent for a moment, processing what he was suggesting. Yes, it was true. Besides being a teacher, I had a master's degree and was finishing my doctorate in a very specific area: fraud detection in public and private financial systems. It was my passion, my area of expertise, something I did for love of knowledge, not for money or recognition. I had published articles, given lectures at universities, was a technical consultant in some legal processes involving city halls and public companies. But this was a side of my life that the family didn't even know existed, because to them, I was just the poor teacher who made coccinha at birthday parties. Rogerio was asking me for help. He was practically begging me to analyze Leonardo's case, to use my knowledge to find some loophole, some proof that my nephew really didn't know about the scheme. And the irony of all this didn't escape me. The same young man who had humiliated me, who had laughed at my life, who had indirectly called me a failure, now depended on me to avoid having his life destroyed. I could have hung up on my brother. I could have said I was too busy, that it wasn't my area of practice, that they should look for another specialist. It would be fair. It would even be understandable. But then I thought about my mother, who would be devastated if she saw her grandson in jail. I thought about my own conscience and about the person I was deep down. I wasn't vindictive. I wasn't petty. I was someone who believed in justice, in doing what's right even when it's difficult. So I told my brother I would take a look at the case without promising anything. 2 days later, a huge box arrived at my door with all the case documents. There were thousands of pages, contracts, spreadsheets, printed emails, tax reports, bank documents. I spent the entire weekend immersed in it, taking notes, cross-referencing information, using data analysis software that I had access to through the university. And you know what I discovered? Leonardo really was innocent, at least in legal terms. He had been used as a front by the company's top executives. The frauds had been committed at a layer far above him, and the documents he had signed were purposely vague and too technical for him to understand what he was really authorizing. But this wasn't clear in the case. The prosecution was painting Leonardo as one of the architects of the scheme, when in reality he was just another victim. I put together a 50-page technical report with graphs, statistical analyses, temporal comparisons that clearly showed that the fraudulent decisions had been made even before Leonardo took on the manager position. I proved with irrefutable data that he didn't have access to the bank accounts used in the money laundering, that his emails showed he questioned certain operations but was always ignored by superiors, that his financial gains were compatible with his position and showed no suspicious enrichment that would indicate conscious participation in the scheme. It was top-level work, the kind that consultants charge tens of thousands of reais to do. And I was doing it for free to save a nephew who had despised me. I sent the report to Leonardo's defense attorney, who was absolutely impressed. He called me personally to say that this was exactly what was missing to turn the case around, that with that technical analysis, they had real chances of getting an acquittal, or at least a much more favorable deal. He asked for my authorization to list me as an assistant expert for the defense and to possibly call me to testify as a technical witness. I agreed, but made it clear that I was only there for justice and for my mother, not out of love for Leonardo. The following weeks were intense. The report I had prepared caused an earthquake in the case. The prosecution tried to refute my conclusions, but couldn't, because my work was based on solid scientific methodology and objective data. The judge requested a special hearing where I had to personally present my findings. I remember entering that courthouse, dressed in my most serious suit, carrying my laptop and a folder full of documents. In the room was Leonardo. For the first time since the party, I was seeing him in person, and the contrast was shocking. The arrogant young man from months ago had disappeared. In his place was a pale, thin man with deep, dark circles, and an expression of pure terror. When our eyes met, I saw something I had never seen in him before: shame. For 3 hours I presented my analyses to the judge, the prosecutors, and the lawyers from both sides. I explained each spreadsheet, each data cross-reference, each technical conclusion. I answered difficult questions, refuted attempts to disqualify my work, maintained my professional and technical posture the entire time. And at the end, when the judge dismissed me and thanked me for my contribution to clarifying the facts, I saw the relief on Leonardo's lawyer's face. They had a chance now, a real chance. The case still took a few more months to be concluded, but with my report as the centerpiece of the defense, the result was very different from what it would have been. Leonardo got a deal. He wasn't found innocent of everything, because technically he had failed to do adequate due diligence on some operations, but it was recognized that he had no knowledge of the larger scheme and hadn't consciously benefited from the frauds. The sentence was a heavy fine, community service, and probation, but no prison. For someone who was facing 8 to 12 years in jail, it was practically a miracle. After it all ended, my brother Rogerio came to my house. He was different, more humble, and for the first time in his life, he really looked me in the eyes and said, "Thank you." He admitted that he had been a terrible brother, that he had let Leonardo grow up spoiled and arrogant, that he had failed to teach important values to his son. He said that he now understood that money and material success meant nothing without character, and that I, whom he had always seen as the failed sister, was actually the most successful person in the family because I had built a life with purpose and real knowledge. That conversation didn't erase years of hurt, but it was a start. As for Leonardo, it took him a few weeks to gather the courage to come talk to me. When he finally showed up at my door, he was no longer that arrogant young man from before. He had lost the imported car, was living with his parents again, working at a regular job to pay the fine. And he was destroyed with shame. He apologized. It wasn't a superficial or forced apology. He cried, admitted that he had been an arrogant idiot, that he had treated me like garbage when I didn't deserve it, that he had confused having money with being better than others. He said that the case had been the worst nightmare of his life, but it had also been a brutal awakening to the kind of person he had become. And he thanked me, with a sincerity I had never seen in him, for choosing to help him even after everything he had done. I'm not going to lie and say I accepted his apologies immediately and everything was fine. Deep hurts don't heal with one conversation. But I told him that I recognized the courage it took to come there and admit his mistakes, and that I hoped he really learned from all of this. I said that forgiveness was a process, not a single event, and that he would have to prove with actions, not words, that he had really changed. The following months showed that his change was real. Leonardo started attending my classes at the university. He became interested in my research area, began studying business ethics and compliance. He used his traumatic experience to give lectures at colleges about the dangers of ignoring warning signs in companies, about the importance of questioning orders that seem suspicious, about how unbridled ambition can destroy lives. He became a volunteer in financial education projects for young people from poor communities. It wasn't the glamorous life he had before, but it was a life with meaning. The relationship with my family also changed completely. Suddenly, at family gatherings, people wanted to hear about my work, about my research, about my projects at the university. My mother, who had always been worried about me because I was single and didn't have a traditional life, started talking proudly about her doctorate daughter who saved her grandson from jail. Cousins who barely talked to me before started seeking me out to ask for advice about careers, about studies, about how I had managed to build such valuable expertise earning a teacher's salary. The narrative about who I was changed completely, but the truth is I hadn't changed anything. I had always been this person. They just had never paid attention. And you know what was the most interesting part of all this? I discovered that I didn't need their validation. During those months when I was away from the family, I had been genuinely happy. I had friends who valued me, colleagues who respected my work, students who were inspired by me, Family approval was a nice bonus, but it wasn't essential for my happiness or my self-esteem. This realization was liberating. I decided to accept the new relationship with my family, but with healthy boundaries. I wasn't going to try to impress anyone anymore. I wasn't going to accept disrespect or jokes at my expense anymore. I wasn't going to put their needs above my own anymore. Today, 2 years after that whole situation, my life is much better. I defended my doctorate, and now I'm an assistant professor with a decent salary. I started doing private consulting on corporate fraud cases, which gave me considerable extra income. I traded my old car for a more reliable used one. I'm saving money to buy an apartment. But more important than any material achievement is the peace I feel. I know who I am, I know my worth, and I no longer depend on anyone's validation to feel good about myself. Leonardo and I developed a new relationship based on mutual respect. He's no longer my tormentor, and I'm no longer his poor aunt. We're two adults who went through a difficult experience and learned important lessons. He consults me frequently about professional and ethical matters, and I help him when I can. We're not super close, but there's a respect there that didn't exist before. The great lesson I took from all this is that people often judge value by the wrong markers. They look at cars, clothes, houses, trips, and assume these things define success and human worth. But when the storm comes, when life falls apart, it's not the imported car that saves you. It's knowledge, it's competence, it's character. It's the real skills you developed, the network of genuine relationships you built, the professional reputation you cultivated with honest work over the years. I was invisible to my family because I didn't have the external symbols of success they valued. But when the critical moment arrived, I was the only person in that entire family who had the specific knowledge and technical skills needed to solve the problem. Another important lesson is about humiliation and how we respond to it. When Leonardo humiliated me at that party, I had 2 choices. Let that define me and become bitter and resentful, or use that pain as motivation to assert myself even more in my own life and values. I chose the second option. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't fantasize about the day he would regret it. I simply distanced myself, protected my peace, and continued living my life in the best way possible. And when the opportunity came to help him, I chose to be the bigger person, not because he deserved it, but because it was who I wanted to be. This doesn't mean you always have to help those who wronged you. Sometimes permanently distancing yourself is the right answer. Each situation is unique. In my case, I chose to help because there were other people involved that I loved, like my mother, and because my professional conscience wouldn't allow me to let an injustice happen when I had the power to prevent it. But I did it on my terms, with my boundaries, and without expecting anything in return. Today, when I look back at that horrible day at the party where I cried in the kitchen, I almost thank it for happening. Not because the humiliation was good, it was terrible, but because it forced me to re-evaluate my relationships and my boundaries. It made me realize I was investing emotional energy in people who didn't value me, and that I needed to reallocate that energy to healthier relationships. It made me understand my own worth in a way I hadn't understood before. And there's also a beautiful poetic justice in this whole story. Leonardo thought I was irrelevant, a failure, someone who had nothing significant to offer the world. And then, when his entire life was about to collapse, when he was facing the possibility of losing literally everything, the only person who could save him was exactly that aunt he had despised. Not because I had money to hire better lawyers, not because I had powerful connections, but because I had specialized knowledge he didn't imagine existed. Because I had spent years studying, researching, developing expertise in an area that to him probably seemed irrelevant and boring. All that time he was laughing at me. I was becoming a world expert in the exact area that would be needed to save him. Life has these ironies. You never know when your skills will be needed, when your knowledge will make a difference, when that thing you do that nobody values will suddenly become the most important thing in the world. That's why I always tell my students, build real knowledge, develop true skills, become excellent at what you do, not for the applause or immediate recognition, but because these things have intrinsic value that will eventually be recognized. The world may ignore you for a while, but genuine competence always finds its moment to shine. My story isn't special in the sense that these things happen to many people. There are many people out there being underestimated, ignored, belittled by family, colleagues, society, when in reality they have incredible talents and abilities that simply aren't being seen or valued at the moment. And many of these people, just as I did, will have their moment where it becomes obvious to everyone how much they were always worth. But even if that moment never comes, even if external recognition never arrives, what matters is that you know your own worth, that you don't let other people's limited vision define who you are or what you're worth. If you're reading this story and identifying with it because someone humiliated you, underestimated you, made you feel small, I want to tell you, don't let that define you. Use that pain as fuel, not to seek revenge, but to become even better at what you do. Invest in yourself, in your knowledge, in your skills. Build a life that has meaning for you, regardless of what others think. And when your time to shine comes, and it will come, be gracious about it. Be the bigger person. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't making others suffer, it's living well and being happy despite everything. And if you're someone who has already treated other people with contempt, who has already judged someone by their external appearance or life circumstances, take Leonardo's story as a warning. You never know when you'll need exactly the person you're belittling now. You never know what talents are hidden under a humble surface. The person you're ignoring may be exactly who will save you someday. Treat people with respect, not because you might need them in the future, but because it's simply the right thing to do. Because everyone deserves basic dignity, regardless of what they have or don't have. Looking at everything that happened, I wouldn't change anything. Yes, the humiliation was horrible. Yes, it took me months to process the hurt. But that experience made me grow in ways I wouldn't have grown otherwise. It made me stronger, more aware of my worth, more selective about where I invest my emotional energy. And it gave me a story that I can now share to perhaps help other people who are going through similar situations. Life is funny, isn't it? The one who made me cry ended up being the one who gave me the opportunity to demonstrate my true worth. The one everyone ignored ended up being the salvation when no one else could help. And in the end, we all learned valuable lessons about respect, humility, and the true meaning of success. If this story touched you in some way, if you identified with my journey or learned something from it, leave a comment sharing your own experience. Is there someone in your life who underestimated you but later discovered your worth? Or have you been like Leonardo, having to swallow your pride and ask for help from someone you didn't treat well? All our stories are important and can help other people who are going through similar situations. And if this message inspired you or made you reflect on your own relationships and values, don't forget to leave that like and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming, justice, and the beauty of staying true to your values, even when no one is watching. Because in the end, what defines you isn't how others see you, but who you choose to be when no one is watching.